Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Society of Illustrators. Thanks to Anel Miller and her staff for hosting this evening of roundtable discussion and a few other goodies, a few other surprises. This event is organized because we have an exhibition on the second floor of cartoons on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of Cartooning for Peace, which was created here in 2006, under the auspices of Kofi Annan, who was then the Secretary General of the United Nations, and Jean Plantu, who's the French cartoonist, who I kind of represent here because I run the Paris operation. My name is Mark Gore. The exhibition was curated by Liza Donnelly, who's here, and who'll be speaking a bit later on, with help from one of my colleagues in Paris, who runs the database we have of about 25,000 cartoons. So today we're going to have a roundtable discussion which will last approximately an hour. But first, we'd like to speak about a cartoonist who's in trouble and who's in difficulty in Malaysia. That's one of the roles of all of us, Cartooning for Peace, and all of us in our different roles, is to defend people who are struggling with their freedom of expression. And the cartoonist Zunar currently is having big problems. So Patrick Chapat will introduce Zunar and what we're trying to do about his current situation.
Yeah, hello, everybody. So my name is Chapat. I work for the New York Times and for Swiss newspapers. Currently live in Geneva, where we have, so Cartooning for Peace, you said a few words about it. It's a Paris-based initiative, 147 cartoonists around the world. It's a network, and we need to talk to each other more than ever in these troubled times. And in Geneva, we have a foundation that we created 6 years ago, and we have established a prize, an international prize, recognizing a cartoonist or many cartoonists, not only for their work, beautiful work, but also for their courage and the circumstances in which they do their job. And Zunar, that you see here, is the winner of the 2016 prize. He came to Geneva, he got his prize from the hands of Kofi Annan. And Zunar is facing trial in next January, and he risks 43 years in jail. Under the Sedition Act, he has 9 counts against him for his drawings, for his relentless drawings about freedom of speech in Malaysia, but specifically the drawing he's been doing about the Prime Minister of Malaysia and the government of Malaysia, which is involved in a huge corruption scandal. 2.6 billion? It's really big. And he has been going after the Prime Minister in his cartoons with an incredible courage, and he's paying the price directly. And we just learned, 10 days ago, that he got physically attacked. He was putting up an exhibition. Yeah, he was putting up an exhibition that was taken down. He was arrested for a day, and his passport is being held. He has a travel ban imposed on him. So we thought that we needed to, as cartoonists, as a community, to do something, and we came up with a communiqué that we are going to publish together, Cartooning for Peace and the Cartoonist Rights Network International, and many other NGOs who are going to help us spread the word. And I'm going to let Liza read the communiqué, and please help us tomorrow spread the message.
New York, December 8th, 2016. Cartoonist members of Cartooning for Peace, Patrick Chapat, Jeff Danziger, Liza Donnelly, and Telnaes, Nicolas Vadot, along with Dr. Robert Russell, who's the Executive Director of Cartoonist Rights Network International, which is an organization that does similar work helping cartoonists, made the following joint statement ahead of Human Rights Day. 1. We, cartoonists, are proud to support our colleague Zunar, a courageous and recognized cartoonist of Malaysia, who has received the 2016 Cartooning for Peace Prize Award of the city of Geneva on May 3rd in Switzerland to mark World Press Freedom Day. 2. By drawing and commenting on current affairs with talent, impertinence, and humor, cartoonists fully and beautifully exercise freedom of expression and thereby extend our own freedom. Zunar, like other editorial cartoonists who are threatened, imprisoned, or forced to flee into exile because of their drawings, deserves the full support of the international community. 3, we call upon the Malaysian authorities to immediately end the continued harassment of cartoonist Zunar. Zunar's fundamental rights to freedom of expression and freedom of movement must be respected according to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights signed by Malaysia. And 4, we join international and human rights NGOs and call upon the Malaysian authorities to lift the travel ban on Zunar with immediate effect and to drop the numerous sedition charges against him. 5, we pay tribute to Zunar and other editorial cartoonists for their courage to work and draw under very difficult circumstances in many regions of the world. Signed, Patrick Chapat, Liza Donnelly, Nicolas Vadot, Jeff Danziger, Ann Telnaes, and Robert Russell. So we're going to put this out on social media, publish it on various websites, and if you're on Twitter or Facebook, please share this to help bring attention to this.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Liza. I'll just introduce, they've been more or less introduced themselves, but I'll quickly give you the introduction of the people around the table. So Ann Telnaes from the Washington Post on my left, Jeff Danziger, New York Times Syndicate on my left as well, Patrick Chapat, who's introduced himself. He works for Le Temps and the New York Times, and he also represents the Swiss Foundation of Cartoon for Peace, he said it. Nicolas Vadot from Le Vif, L'Express and L'Echo in Belgium, and Liza Donnelly from CBS News and the New Yorker. So we're going to start with you, Liza. If you could give us a few words about what's happened since the inception of Cartooning for Peace 10 years ago, when most of you were here. What's changed, or what hasn't changed?
Oh, well, I thought we'd go into that as a group later, but I thought I'd start out by talking about when this group started in 2006. And I actually have a short clip that I wanted to show you first, which will show you Jean Plantu, who is the founder of this organization, in 1991. And there's a lot of story about this incident, but let's see. What happened with Plantu in this setting is what put the seed in his brain to create Cartooning for Peace a good 10 years later. And he had an occasion to meet with Yasser Arafat, the head of the PLO, as you can see him there. And I'll play the video and you can see. So you'll see he has Yasser Arafat there. He's in the company of Mr. Arafat, and Arafat is drawing a flag.
Bah, il n'y a plus qu'à le signer.
Are you going to sign it?
Et il y a, si vous me permettez, peut-être une tendance
And then Shimon Peres was
vers
there,
une solution.
and
Mais
also
pas la
drew on the
solution même.
same piece of paper.
Vous mettez bien la flèche parce que pour être sûr, on avait compris que vous étiez israélien quand même.
Sûrement.
So I think for Plantu, this was the beginning of thinking about Cartooning for Peace and how drawings can bring people together, two people who would not speak to each other or sign a piece of paper that had the other person's name on it. But this organization started in 2006, and it was right following the Danish Cartoon controversy. If any of you remember that, it was the first time we realized that cartoons could cause death and destruction. If you don't know about it, you can just Google Danish Cartoon controversy, and there's a whole Wikipedia page about it. There's been books written about it since then, and it was a really shocking time for us all in the cartoon world. And Kofi Annan was then Secretary General of the UN, and they were having a week-long initiative at the UN here in New York called Unlearning Intolerance. And Mr. Annan he's a big fan of cartoons, and he wanted to have a day dedicated to cartoonists. So they invited 12 cartoonists to come speak about their work. And I was there. I was honored to be there. Anne, Jeff, Patrick, and and several other cartoonists from different parts of the world. I don't know if I need to name them all, but they're all, except for the Palestinian man who has since passed away. His work is upstairs too, I think. Yeah, Baha. Yeah, their work is represented upstairs in the gallery, the show upstairs, and since then, the organization is 147 cartoonists around the world, and we come together and have panels like this all over the world. Not all of us go to all of them by any means. People travel depending on the funds to meet with other cartoonists that live in that country, talk about their problems, have exhibits. It's a wonderful organization, and we're going to talk more about it as we go forward. So from now, what we're going to do is everybody has a selection of their work, and we're going to rotate around the room and just look at their work and talk about it a little bit, and then we'll have a back and forth and then questions, right? Does that sound right?
That's right. So, Anne, I think you're first on the list with...
Is this...
Yeah, it should be working.
Working? Yes? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so yes, Liza mentioned the Danish cartoon controversy, which happened in 2005, 2006, which kind of started all this. And one of the conversations that we had in the United States, especially among cartoonists, was, where do you draw a line about what cartoons you can and cannot draw? And it disturbed me because, here in the United States, we have our First Amendment rights, and I really didn't quite understand why my colleagues thought there was a line, since we do have, freedom of speech. So I created this cartoon in 2006 because I wanted to show that everyone has a line. Everybody has something that will offend them. And if we allow for everyone to decide that something can or cannot be drawn, then we're going to end up being in a box. So this was the reason that I created this. I remember very well we had a conference, the AAEC, which is the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists, right after the Danish Cartoon controversy, and we had a panel discussion between representatives from different religious organizations in Minneapolis, which was where we had the conference. And I just remember they spent a lot of time talking about how, cartoonists have done horrible drawings about, their religions, and they went on. And I finally, at the end, I just said to them, can you tell me specifically what you don't want us to draw? And do you know that not one of them could come up with anything? Except the imam, who said, well, you cannot draw Muhammad. That was about the only thing. But it was very interesting to hear that because, it's a lot harder to kind of pin down exactly what's offensive and what isn't. So the next one is another one that I created about that time, which kind of follows what I was just talking about. People say, I'm all for free speech unless I find it personally offensive. And then, of course, we had the next one. We had the horrible Charlie Hebdo killings. And, at first, if you remember, and this was in 2015, you remember that everybody was in solidarity. There were protests, and everybody said we have to support cartoonists. But then, the conversation kind of went off in a different way, and a lot of writers and cartoonists were questioning what Charlie Hebdo did. Was it, what did they do that was so offensive, and should we not allow that? So I created this. This is a multi-panel one for the Washington Post. So the first one is, so now the shock of the murders has turned to questioning Charlie Hebdo's satire. Some cartoonists and writers have described the cartoons as anti-Muslim, blasphemous, offensive, and bigoted. The 2009 firing of a cartoonist at Charlie Hebdo, who wrote an anti-Semitic column, has also been mentioned. And this is me. First of all, I'm not a big fan of bathroom humor. But the only question we should be asking is, do we condone threats or violence toward individuals because of what they say or draw, regardless of how offensive the words or images are? And I say no. Secondly, and most seriously, it's a valid discussion to have about why the divisions between people are so deep and our political discourse have become so toxic. However, this is not what we should be talking about now. Because what happens once we get beyond the easy images to condemn? And who makes that decision? I mean, that's my big question, is who decides? Are we going to allow government? Are we going to allow religious organizations to decide? You know, who makes that decision? And then all people must have the right to express themselves without fear. Otherwise, we risk losing all of our freedoms. So now we're in a unique situation here in the United States because of the recent presidential elections. And I mean, I have to tell you, this is a very strange position for me to be in specifically, because I remember going to our conferences overseas, and I'd always say, you know, our colleagues have it so much worse, just like Zunar. You know, they're imprisoned, they're not allowed to travel. But I'm actually thinking, you know, this is going to be a very interesting time for American editorial cartoonists, because what is going to happen? We have a president-elect that says he wants to change the libel laws. This is a big deal. So I'll show you a couple of recent cartoons that I did of Donald Trump. So as we all know, he loves his little red hats. So I thought, well, this is the hat he really should be wearing, because this is what he wants to be. And I think the next one is a GIF. So I don't know if you all remember this, but in the last couple of weeks, he summoned some news executives and news anchors to come speak with him off the record, which I don't understand why they even agreed to do. But once they got up there, he spent the whole time you know, saying how awful the media coverage has been to him. And then he proceeded to tell, I think it was NBC, that why are you using this one photograph of me, because it shows all my double chins. So my colleague Signe Wilkinson, who is here from the Philadelphia Daily News, immediately tweeted out a cartoon where she drew like multiple chins of him. And of course, I had to follow suit. And I said, yeah, I'll just keep putting a lot on him. So anyway, I mean, to be serious, you know, you know, ever since the Danish cartoon controversy, this really has not stopped. We have to be very vigilant about, you know, our overseas colleagues. And frankly, you know, here we should be aware of what's probably going to happen as well. So, and that's it. Yeah.
Thanks, Anne. I think, Jeff, you're next on the... It's Nicolas? Sorry.
C'est bon? Oui. Hello, I'm Nicolas Vadot. So I've got a few cartoons. So I work for two newspapers in Belgium. One is a weekly general newspaper, and the other one is a daily finance newspaper. And this was done just after the Charlie Hebdo attacks back in 2015, because at the time, I remember there was a huge demonstration in Chechnya with 800,000 people who were demonstrating against the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. And as you know, Chechnya is a very huge democracy in the world, and the Chinese as well were demonstrating, and even the Pope said, well, you have, if someone slaps my mother in the face, I have the right to retaliate. That's what he said, supporting Charlie Hebdo. So he wasn't supporting Charlie Hebdo at all. And so that's what I did, because we have this freedom of speech, and usually I draw a little green cat, which appears in every cartoon of mine, and so he's the image of me in the cartoon, and so we have the right to actually draw whatever we want, but we have this above us, and this is getting bigger and bigger, and so where do we draw the line? This is the question we've all been asking ourselves. I have a few more. So this was published just after the attacks, and for us, for maybe 4 weeks, we could draw whatever we wanted, because no editor could censor us, because otherwise it wouldn't have been supportive. So I published this as a first page 3 in my magazine, and my editor-in-chief, who is a woman, received this, and I had her on the phone, and I said, okay, we are going to publish this in the magazine. And there was a bit of a silence at the other end of the phone, and she said, okay. And she published it, because what I wanted to show in this cartoon is that all of the people who were demonstrating on the 10th of January in Paris did not know what Charlie Hebdo was exactly about, because the proportion of anti-religious cartoons in Charlie Hebdo is maybe 5%. Most of the cartoons that appear in Charlie Hebdo show usually big dicks and stuff like that. So really, it was clear to have another point of view about the demonstrations, and Charlie Hebdo is not going on about Islam all the time. It's just a small proportion of what they do. And this is a very important one, because to me the relationship between cartooning and childhood is very important, because that's what the Kouachi brothers, who killed the cartoonist at Charlie Hebdo, couldn't stand. They tend to think that religious is natural and that drawing is cultural. It's the other way around. Drawing is natural to every human. If you show a piece of paper and a pen to a 2-year-old wherever on the planet, they will start to draw. For a 2-year-old to believe in God, he has or she has to be taught that God exists. So religion to me is cultural and drawing is natural. And that's exactly what I try to show to my readers every day, every week. I show them a mirror, and I want them to remember that they used to be kids, they used to be children, they used to have innocence within them before they built the shell that we all built as we grow older. So each time I'm here to remind them that they had this innocence within them, and this innocence tends to disappear. And that's what irony is about in our job, is to address adult issues using a childish weapon, which is drawing. And that's what I wanted to show in this piece. Luz is the cartoonist who did the Tout est pardonné cover after the attacks. And this was done just a week after the attacks, because at one stage we became superstars. We were on the media everywhere, and everyone wanted to have us on their shows. And it happened, and it happens again. I remember I live in Brussels, and as you know, we had terrorist attacks in Brussels on the 22nd of March this year. And the day afterwards, I had 3 foreign TVs in my office asking me what I thought about the attacks. And I said, who am I to say what I think about the attack? I'm just a cartoonist. But people tend to make a connection between every terrorist attack now and the terrorist attacks at Charlie Hebdo. So that I want to show in that cartoon that our job hasn't changed. We draw the same way we used to do, but the way people see us has changed a lot, and that's what I wanted to show in that cartoon. And I think I have another last one. You know, as a citizen, I regret Barack Obama, but as a cartoonist, I don't regret Barack Obama, because he was very hard to draw. Whereas Donald Trump, it's the other way around, of course. So we will have plenty of fun with him, especially us, because we don't live in America. You might have more problems with than we will, but who knows? So I wanted to. This was published a month ago in Belgium, and you can publish all sorts of cartoons like that in Belgium. I hope we can do that for a long time afterwards. I think there is another one. Yes. In this one, I wanted to show that actually my worst enemy is not the terrorist; it's the accountant, because in a newspaper. As you know, newspapers don't sell as the way they used to sell in the past, and now people want, especially advertisers, they want the paper to be not controversial at all, so it can touch all publics. And our job is the opposite of advertising. So to me, really, the accountant is a major issue, and that's what I wanted to show in that particular piece.
Jeff.
Okay, most of these, unfortunately, are of Trump. And the syndicate said, well, you know, every day when you do it, could you try to do one that's not of Trump? I said, okay, I'll try. And then, of course, it didn't get used. So I saw that wasn't going to work. This is the 2 million people who voted for Clinton don't feel bad. Obviously, they were legal voters. And then I was trying to write in baby talk, now Boda we nosy, and great many people thought it was something dirty or something else, but it was just simply baby talk. Most fascinating character in this whole thing is Melania. Um, to go after somebody's wife in the, not to go after, but I mean to do satire about somebody's wife is considered to be, we leave their family alone, we leave their kids alone. But in this case, we have to make an exception. She's a startlingly strange person to, I mean, one of the worst jokes was that he had kept the box that she came in so that she could send it back. And actually, this guy who said "Hail Trump," and when I heard and people in the audience were giving a stiff arm salute, you know, and you, my wife used to say, you know, your job is so easy. You just roll out of bed and somebody's done something stupid. And the Uncle Sam figures, "Don't tell me Colonel Klink, General Burkhalter, Sergeant Schultz, you know, which one are you?" This, however, turns out to be generational. A lot of people didn't know, a lot of younger people didn't know who these characters were. I'm actually very proud of this because also a lot of people didn't remember that the Romneys had put the dog on the roof, and then, of course, the dog pooped, and when he got on the roof, he was scared, and then they had to take the car down to the car wash and to wash off the poop. I'm really what I'm really proud of in this has nothing to do with anything. Is that the swirling brush? It really looks like a swirling brush, doesn't it? Okay. All right. Also, doesn't seem to be fair to make fun of Ivanka. And no one ever asks, Ivanka, what kind of name is that? You just take your previous wife's name and throw another letter in, and then... look, darling, the last print issue of the New York Observer, your newspaper you paid $10 million for, has failed as a print publication. It's just a website. And he said, well, I'd love to see it, but I must go advise the president on how to manage the economy. Anyway, that's go. All right. And this is a non-Trump cartoon, so I'd like to have a round of applause for a non that the exits some Brexits from the a local pub. This is Liam exit and Geordie exit and Clive exit and Basil exit, all being thrown out. The inside joke is that the barrel over here is Old Speckled Band, which you always get a couple people who remember there's a beer called Speckled Hen, and there was also a Sherlock Holmes story called The Speckled Band or something like that. Yeah. Safe to get out of bed, Grandpa, look who's back, Jeff Sessions, who was turned down for the job, and through the magic of Photoshop, you can take photographs and stick them into the cartoon. The person at the Washington Post didn't remember who that was. I know it. What? She didn't know. She didn't. She said, "Who is that?" And I said, "Well, everybody know who that is." All right, okay, fine. New York audience. All right. Thank you.
Patrick Chapat.
Yeah, so coming back to your question, looking back at those 10 years from 2005 and the Danish Cartoons controversy, that was what happened then. That was what we realized as cartoonists, that a simple thing, as you say, just a childish thing like a cartoon could trigger demonstrations and death. And that was for us cartoonists, it was really a shift. It was 2005. That's when the world shifted, and that was the 9/11 of cartoonists. That's when we understood that it would never be the same again, and we had that shadow looming over our head that something would happen, because we understood that it's not. I mean, the danger was not just around the world; it could be around the corner. Because what the lesson of the Danish Cartoons controversy was that whatever you draw, wherever you are, can be seen by people that are for whom those cartoons were not meant to be understood. And so that would be the trigger of big misunderstandings. And that's the years we've been going through, the last 10 years. It hasn't gone really better in terms of freedom of speech. It hasn't really evolved in a good direction. The next cartoon is a cartoon that was published in the New York Times about Erdogan of Turkey and the state of Turkish democracy. And can you figure out that a Turkish demonstrator was arrested because of that cartoon? He showed that cartoon in a demonstration in Turkey, and he was charged with insulting the flag. Whereas, of course, the flag is only being used here to illustrate that we're talking about Turkey, right? Turkish democracy. So the police went after that guy just for showing that cartoon. And that's the world we live in. Strong men are on the rise. Everywhere rights seem to be threatened. And that decade led us to, of course, the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And we live in the media world. We live with the notion of deadlines, but in 2015, after Charlie Hebdo, the definition of deadline became quite serious, quite another one. And something very interesting happened. A few months after Charlie Hebdo, we gathered, a lot of cartoonists gathered in Paris. It was a Cartooning for Peace gathering, very interesting discussion that we had. And Rhys from Charlie Hebdo was there, the editor. And I think it was October 2015. And he said, because they were being on the spot, as you say, they were being questioned, their humor, the work they do, the misunderstandings. And he said, but you guys don't understand. It's not about Charlie Hebdo. It's about anyone. It can happen to anyone. Tomorrow they will attack other people. And just 2 weeks after that, Paris happened. You know, the attack on terraces in Paris. And to do a cartoon on that, the only thing I could do was think about a photo. I don't know how many of you know that photo that really would capture the essence of what was attacked in Paris that that mild night of November. And it's a photo by Douaneau, Le baiser de l'hôtel de ville. Very moving photo, very beautiful image. That was just the only image I could think of to capture the moment. And then coming to the present time, again, things don't seem to be getting quite better. Brexit happened, and after Brexit, I did that cartoon which shows you can go to the next one. And now the globalization of nationalism, and Trump on the left, Putin on the right, maybe Marine Le Pen tomorrow. That's the new world we live in. That's the new reality we are facing today, entering a new era, a new dawn with the orange colored dawn. You know, there was an ad in Europe that said the future is orange. I think it's going to be a reality now. And to you now, Liza.
So I knew I was going to follow Patrick. I put this PowerPoint together, so I selected this to show you that I did for Politico Europe. Not recently, I did it several months ago when she was running, Le Pen was running for something. And you know, back then we thought it was frightening that Trump was getting so much attention, and it was we had no clue that he would get as far as he did. But it's a new reality now. I've done a lot of Trump cartoons also. I do these mostly for Medium.com. The New Yorker doesn't publish things like this, so, but I can't help myself. This is the kind of thing, maybe you're familiar with my work, this is the kind of thing that I do in the New Yorker, and this is one I did right after 9/11. I was having trouble coming up with anything after 9/11, and this, I thought of this, and they bought it and published it, and I was back on track, and I decided after that to dedicate more of my work to political cartoons. I've been doing New Yorker-style political cartoons since I started there, which I'm sure you all know what they're like. They're very mild and sort of about how politics affects daily life. But with after 9/11 and with the more rise of feminism and the rise of the internet, I began to do more and more cartoons about politics and about feminism, because I've always been a feminist, but I never really used it much in my work. And this is one about what all women have to think about before they walk out the door, whether you're conscious of it or not. So I try to get at the political and the personal. I try to push myself to do stronger stuff. And I think this also coincided with being a part of Cartooning for Peace, is seeing my colleagues and their strong work and wanting to feel that I was doing more my part, because I have a skill and I can speak to things with my skill. This I did fairly recently, when there was a lot of stories about rape going on in the United States and globally. When I grow up, I hope my rape allegations are believed. Online, the New Yorker didn't buy it. So this one, I began to think about feminism, and I used to believe that I couldn't do a cartoon that was not about being an American woman if I was going to do a feminist cartoon. And then I began to think that's limiting, and I need to figure out a way to do more cartoons about global feminism, about issues for women around the world, if I can. I didn't know if I could. So this is one that I did last year, I think, and it's talking about how women are diverse. We're all different. We all look different, we act different, we sound different, we behave differently. But what do we have in common? Breasts, love clothes, know how to cook, we have vaginas. Are we nurturing? Are we sweet? Are we thoughtful? Are we soft? No, we're all assaulted, belittled, raped, dismissed, harassed, and underpaid. So that's what we all have in common to different degrees on some level. I mean, I can't really know what it's like to be a woman in Afghanistan, because I'm nowhere near that. But we have that, many of us have that in common, which is horrible. This I did about Saudi Arabia, the driving issue in Saudi Arabia a year or so ago, Road to Freedom. Women activists in Saudi Arabia are being tried as terrorists for driving. We want to drive. Maybe they think we'll run over all men. Driving is not a terrorist act. It's about freedom for all women. Oh, sorry. Maybe they think we'll run over all men. It's tempting. And sometimes I try to look for broader issues with feminism and women's rights. And I read a story about how women are having to use their bodies in order to gain freedom. And I don't always do drawings about women. It's often about larger issues. And I did this one right after Charlie Hebdo. I did many cartoons after Charlie Hebdo, as we all did. And my feeling is that there were so many cartoons being produced right after Charlie Hebdo. It was the internet was just flooded with imagery, cartoons and whatnot. And so many of the cartoons that I saw depicted the pen or the brush as a weapon. And I thought, okay, that's one way to look at it, but that's not how I feel. I feel like my pen and my brush are tools of dialogue. They're tools of conversation. They're tools of peace, more than attacking. We can talk about that, because I think I'm not saying that other cartoonists can't use their pens as modes of attack, and they should, but that's not my style. So that's it.
Well, brilliant. Thanks, Liza. Thanks to all of you for the presentation. I wanted to come back to one of the subjects that was mentioned earlier on related to Charlie Hebdo. And some of you were talking about children. How do you actually explain, maybe Nicolas, you can address this because we talked about a related issue last night. How do you explain Charlie Hebdo to children when you go into classes? Because Charlie Hebdo was not addressed in a unanimous way. I think you touched on it a bit in your presentation.
Yeah, because going to school and talk to children is a large part of what we do at Cartooning for Peace, and I do it a lot. What I tell them is, first of all, they have the right to be shocked. And they tend to think that because of political correctness, people don't have the right to be shocked. But I am usually shocked by Charlie Hebdo's cartoons. But it's not because you're shocked that you have to kill the others. And sometimes you have children who tell me, yes, but you know, they drew the prophet, they deserve to die. And then I tell them, if a woman gets raped because she was wearing a miniskirt, will you say that she deserved it? No, it's not. The problem is not the woman wearing the miniskirt. The problem is the rapist. It's exactly the same. So you have to tell them that blasphemy is a right and has to remain a right, because if blasphemy ceases to be a right, then it's not the law of men that applies, it's the law of God. And the main difference between God and mankind is we are certain that mankind does exist, which is not the same with religion. And you have the right to be religious, but you have the right to be non-religious. And that's what I keep telling kids in schools. And most of all, usually I tell them they have the right to disagree, and debating is part of a democracy. And democracy is not something that is there forever. It's something that has to be protected, and we can all protect it, especially starting with youngsters. And usually I tell headmasters who are afraid to have us in their schools that I want to speak to those 13, 14-year-old kids before some of them become monsters and shoot me dead when they turn 20. So that's very important, to go to school and speak to them.
Does anyone else has experience of these issues about going into talking about freedom of speech to young people or in other forums, and the difficulties that you encounter, or not?
Well, I was living in Los Angeles when Charlie Hebdo happened. And then I participated to a lot of panels and discussions and roundtables. And I was quite surprised that, coming from a French culture, that I spent most of the time explaining what Charlie Hebdo was and what actually humor, the way they do it, was. And so you don't have to go to Afghanistan or Indonesia to meet misunderstanding. It's humor. The drama of cartoon is this: we are at the crossing of image and humor. The image part is universal, but the humor is very cultural. There is the humor of Charlie Hebdo is very much to do with May '68 in France. It is a tradition. It is a way of. They practice what is called humour bête et méchant, so silly and nasty humor, which is hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived through that tradition, who hasn't understood the symbols of that tradition. So I found myself doing a lot of explaining, and frankly, I don't see the solution to that issue, to that main issue, because we will not come up with a universal sense of humor. I don't think that's going to be possible, common to everybody on this planet. So we're going to be faced with the possibility of big misunderstandings. And I do think that it was maybe the first shock of globalization, the Charlie Hebdo thing, the Danish cartoons. It's a cultural shock. It's just not, I mean, those cartoons will circulate. I find myself explaining Charlie Hebdo cartoons all the time. There's every 2 months a new controversy about cartoons that are everywhere on social media and that provoke reactions. And a lot of people who are confronted with these images, they just don't understand the humor, which is something we called l'humour au deuxième degré in French, is not something you can translate. You have second-degree murder, but that's something else. Second-degree humor is basically the idea that when it's drawing something, but you understand as a reader that the cartoonist actually means the opposite. So it's that distance that is sometimes hard to explain to an audience that is not prepared for those cartoons.
And Charlie Hebdo is very French, and you can't export it. It's a bit like baseball with America, you see. Baseball is part of your culture, but you can't export it anywhere because we don't understand it. It's the same thing with Charlie Hebdo's cartoons. But even within Europe, you can't export Charlie Hebdo's humor in Belgium, which is a neighboring country, because it's not part of the culture, and people will be shocked in Belgium more than they are in France. So even if you were shocked in America by the Charlie Hebdo attack, you weren't alone on the planet. And that's the problem with Charlie Hebdo. They think that the humor they have is universal, but it's not universal. And that's where they get it wrong. They think that their normality is the world's normality, which is not the case.
On to another subject, I noted the Trump cartoons and the amazing cartoons we've just seen about that subject. Is there fear among you, the American cartoonists, that there will be repercussions, problems, difficulties, which will be a real change from what we currently have in the past administrations, Anne?
Oh.
As I'm speaking as a European as well, because
Yeah.
it's difficult for us.
Yeah.
As Nicolas was talking about how to interpret Charlie Hebdo as a Brit, I can't understand Charlie Hebdo, even though I'm half French. But as a European, it's difficult to see how to approach that.
Yeah, in terms of Trump, it's early, obviously, but I think we have a pretty good idea considering how much Saturday Night Live bothers him. I mean, he's always tweeting about how it's so unfair. I'm thinking he doesn't even understand the concept of satire. That he thinks that they're treating him unfairly. So that's my concern. I mean, I know it's hard to take seriously until you actually see it happen. And frankly, we've been very lucky as American cartoonists because we haven't had this situation. But I'm going to be very curious to see what happens down the road because he's very thin-skinned. He definitely likes to lash out if he feels wronged. So we will see, and how that filters down to editors and publications. I mean, are they going to be worried? Then we feel the pressure. So I am concerned about it.
So is the concern about the fact there'll be some kind of self-censorship rather than the fact that the administration will come down on people? The editors will self-censor their own journalists or cartoonists.
And we had that after 9/11. I remember very well speaking to many of my colleagues. They weren't necessarily told not to do Bush cartoons, but they could feel that maybe if they did them, there would be a problem. It didn't last forever, but there definitely was, weeks there, months, where cartoonists were not even criticizing George W. Bush. I mean, he was, but no one else was. So yeah, it was a time where self-censorship definitely played in. I have to say one thing about Trump. The media's done a horrible job, as we all know, about covering Trump until it was too late. My editorial cartooning colleagues in the United States have, on the whole, have done a really good job on Trump because they were there right in the beginning and they knew, even though we draw the funny pictures, we knew what a threat he was right away and we could see it. So hopefully that's a good.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the television media particularly was. I did a cartoon. I didn't show up, but obviously, Trump in bed with the media.
Yeah. But I think the cartoonists, on the whole, have done a very powerful job.
Jeff, something about that subject?
If you were working in New York and you knew Donald Trump's record in New York, it was a little bit different from the rest of the country. Evidently, they didn't understand who he was, but he was so conclusively loathed in this country, in this city, that even and people would say, you know, he is embarrassing to New York City, which is that takes that takes something. But we knew it here, but nobody paid much attention. I think the press actually did a pretty good job, at least the New York press, with the exception of the Post. I think the websites and certain the Times and God knows the New York Daily News, and you realize that Mark Zuckerman hates his guts for reasons having nothing to do with politics, having to do with real estate, which is all anybody cares about anyway.
Liza, do you want to add something on Trump? No. Because we have Europe and the US represented around the table, and this brings me to the subject of taboos. Are there taboos that you have, all of you, or that you feel you might have if you let yourself go to them? Any pressure, unseen or seen, that you feel you have in your work? Things that you when you look at a European cartoonist, you think I wouldn't be able to draw that because it wouldn't be understood, and the reverse. Nicolas, do you have an?
Well, we all have
on that one.
We all have taboos because, but they're different in every country. For instance, I lived in Australia for 6 years, and there are 4 things that you don't talk about in Australia. At a dinner or something like that. Religion, psychology, politics, and sex. Then what's left? Real estate. That's true. But then, when you say this to Europeans, they say, "What? So there's nothing to talk about." But then in Europe, we have taboos as well, which you don't have here in America, which they don't have in Australia. Money. When you are invited to someone's place in Australia and he lives in this beautiful house, first thing you say is, "Wow, how much do you pay for that house?" Not a problem. You would never say that in Europe. In Australia, for instance, when you are a foreigner and you arrive, people ask you, "Where are you from?" ethnically speaking, because it's a country of immigration. If you do this in Europe, it's impossible. You will be targeted and put aside as a racist. So we all have taboos, and I'm sure Americans have taboos and Europeans have taboos. If you start thinking that they have taboos and you don't, that's where you really get in trouble. So, and that's what Cartooning for Peace is about as well, is to address the taboos that everyone have, and to start exchanging things like that.
As a matter of fact, just we're working within Cartooning for Peace on a map of taboos, which should come out sometime next year, which will do a little bit what Nicolas is saying, which will identify the main taboos that you have in the different countries, and we'll do it on a digital form and a paper form, and which will accompany all our exhibitions, just so that people can see what you can and can't say in different countries. Sometimes they're quite surprising. Like I thought that the All Blacks was one in Australia, but that's obviously not the case.
No, in New Zealand. You can say whatever you want about the All Blacks in Australia. That's fine.
In Australia, yeah. The All Blacks. Sorry, I got the country wrong. Liza, taboos, things that you.
I'm curious to know what you have on the map for the United States.
I think we've got an old version of this map, and I think it's showing breasts or something like that. That's a problem. I mean, I was looking at this is an old version from 4 or 5 years ago, and then the project was ditched because there was no staff time to take it forward, and I think it was that. Does that make sense?
Breasts or any other anatomy
parts of the anatomy? No, it was just
show penises in this country.
Just breasts, I think. Yeah, let's keep it above board, above the belt, let's say.
Yeah, my taboos are mostly about sex. Really, I don't.
Go for it.
I do draw some. Like I did a cartoon for the New Yorker several years ago with a woman showing her breasts. That was hard for me to draw. And I also did a cartoon.
Was it published?
Yes, it was published. And she was actually talking about sex, which was a stretch for me, but it was fine. And I also did one about when Trump was, that video came out about Trump talking about groping women. I did a cartoon of him groping a woman, and he's doing like this behind behind his back, he's groping this woman, and he's saying, "I'm sorry." So he's like saying, "I'm sorry," but he's still doing it, and that was really hard to draw. It was such a gross thing to draw. I had trouble drawing it, but I do it. I published it on Medium.
I think that the whole situation with Trump has now changed things now when I think about it, because I agree about the anatomy, because I have had problems with that before. But now when I think about it, just recently when this whole thing about Trump and that video where he was talking about pussies, I actually did a cartoon where I actually used that word in a cartoon, and I didn't hear boo from my editors at the Washington Post. I mean, they didn't, and they would have probably questioned that in any other situation. But I think that it's a new ball game with him, and you kind of have to, I don't, not rising to his level, but you kind of have to almost play this. You have to call it out, So yeah, that was an interesting development, because I don't think I could have done that before.
In this movie about the cartoonists, that the Mexican cartoonist whose name is yes, and he was originally Cuban, and he said that when he moved from Cuba to Mexico, they told him there's three things that you can't draw: the president, the army, and the Virgin of Guadalupe.
And then he said, "Those are things I went after immediately."
Yes.
And when you look across the water, Jeff or Anne, to Europe, and you see some of your colleagues' cartoons, do you ever say to yourself, "I couldn't draw that," or "I wouldn't"?
Anytime I look at the Brits, I mean, whatever they're doing over there, Steve Bell. I mean, the stuff he used to do on George W. Bush, I was so envious. Because he did these.
Could you describe what people in the audience what he used to do?
Steve Bell used to do these great George W. Bush as an ape, a chimp. And I remember the specific one where he was in the bathroom and he had like throwing feces all over the place. And I just thought, there is no way in the world my editor would ever let me draw that. But I just love it because it's just it's such wicked drawings, But I don't know. The Trump has changed things. I don't know, where we'll go. But as I said, I could draw that one cartoon and put that word in there, the one that bothers you so much.
And Jeff, things that you see across the water that you wouldn't be able to do yourself, or that you are jealous of, like Anne?
I don't think so. I think that the rule I think that came out of the New York was you don't make fun of bag ladies, you don't use people's physical infirmities, which it's not really necessary to do that. Every once in a while, you say, well, the person is overweight, so we'll draw them overweight. How overweight? And then it's a value judgment of what you wanted to do about that. I used to work for a newspaper in Vermont, and we had a governor who was overweight, and he hated it. And of course, the mistake he made was that I was so happy to find out that he hated it that we did it as much as possible.
Patrick, in the reverse sense, when you look at what cartoonists in the United States can or can't do you ever feel like you're living in another world?
Well, actually, I have 1 foot here and 1 foot on the other side of the ocean. So I'm in the interesting, if not schizophrenic position of having my cartoons in the New York Times website and then in Swiss newspapers, and then also in the international New York Times print edition. So my feet are actually all over the place, not only on both sides of the Atlantic. And it's true that, just to illustrate your point, among the cartoons that maybe I had to rework for the New York Times, one of them was with Silvio Berlusconi cruising in a car with beautiful ladies, and their breasts were
visible,
and there was a bra flying in the air, and I had to put the bra back on the woman. I need to do that. That's for sure. Then I did a cartoon. I had a very stupid idea of mixing Bush with the Indian divinity Shiva. I did a Bush Shiva figure, and then there was a campaign letter from India, obviously not happy about my cartoons. Otherwise, in Switzerland, we don't have any. I live in Geneva now. I'm based in Geneva. We don't have any taboos with money. In Switzerland, we don't have that. No.
It's a trademark.
Yeah, we're fine with that.
Nicolas. What?
I talked earlier on.
Okay, you're okay. Well, let's open it up to the floor then and see if there's some questions for the 5 panelists. So, okay, you've got a microphone here. Yeah, exhibit on the first floor, reception downstairs. The man with the check shirt. Hi.
Hi. Yes, I'm wondering, have the events of the last decade or so had a chilling effect on young people that are thinking of going into cartooning?
I'm the youngest one here.
Nicolas.
Actually, it was even before the attacks. It's hard to find newcomers, but maybe after the attacks, it's getting even more difficult because not only they'll think, how can I make a living out of that, but will I still be alive when I turn 30 or 40? So yeah, it might be a challenge. We'll see that in a couple of years if we see people coming up or not. But it is a question, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I lived in Nepal and India for 8 years, and I've been married to an Indian for 30 years. And I remember being in India when the satanic verses were banned in India because if they were published, they would actually kill people, right? And the government said, this isn't censorship, this is a public safety issue. And I was really struck because I saw Gary Trudeau talking about a year and a half ago about, you know, his criticism of Charlie Hebdo, saying cartoonists have responsibilities. But there's also an after effect that you have to have, and artistic freedom isn't absolute. And my son, who's born here, I'm Canadian, said, Dad, what do you think? And I was a cartoonist for 10 years in Canada before I joined the UN. And I said to him, I would not have drawn those cartoons. I think it's insulting. I think they cause death. But as a former cartoonist and as a believer in freedom, I would not say they should not have done that. I would not have done. And that is a tension as an artist. And the Charlie Hebdo, I think you're right that they really go out of their way to provoke, but it's a very sort of childish humor. It's a very sort of toilet humor. But they do have that right. And I really want to hear from some of the cartoonists on the stage that you have an absolute freedom to write a cartoon that might outrage people, but how would you feel if people died as a result? Did you have a right that supersedes the security and safety of people?
Who wants to answer that?
There are 7 billion people on the planet. You can't do a cartoon without shocking at least one of them. So if we start thinking like that, then we'll stop drawing. Then if, like Patrice said, the attack, the 7th of January attacks were not an attack on cartoonists. It was an attack on democracy. It was an attack on intelligence. And the attacks which followed in November in Paris and then in Brussels and everywhere were the same thing as the Charlie Hebdo attacks. So if we start thinking while we're doing our cartoons that this cartoon might be dangerous somewhere on the planet, then it's the end of our job and it's the end of democracy, because we will all live in a hole and we will all live in fear. And I don't want to live in fear.
Anne? Do you want to add something?
No. I mean, as you saw in my work, I'm sorry. I don't care what anyone says or does. If no one has the right to threaten or kill you because of something you draw or you say, there are plenty of things that offend people. There's plenty of things that offend me. I don't feel the need to kill a cartoonist over what they draw. So I'm sorry. I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. And I agree with you. I think once you start down that road, I don't really know where you stop and who decides what, is offensive and what isn't. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, who is going to make that decision? What can and cannot be drawn?
The death of the whole thing is taking yourself seriously. One of the great things about Trump is he doesn't have a sense of humor. No one has ever heard him say anything funny. What? You heard him say something funny? All right, this gentleman. Oh yeah, no, that's right. But the attention. I'm going to tell one thing about the guy who was just mentioned, Steve Bell. John Major, who was the Prime Minister of England, and he was a very quiet, controlled little man. He came out of the men's room one time, and he had tucked his shirt into the elastic of his jockey shorts. And so Steve Bell saw this, everybody saw it and laughed at it, and he began drawing all of the cartoons from then on. It was incredibly destructive. I mean, the poor man, but it sort of showed something about his character. And then he had in subsequent weeks, the elastic band started to come up until it was about up here, and then he had him coming out. He had the jockey shorts on over his pants, right? And finally, when he left office, Steve Bell drew the jockey shorts floating down the Thames, like and the House of Parliament on fire, like the famous Turner. It was hysterical, and they just about drove him from office with that one thing. So.
And the one thing that we haven't spelled out here, because we tend to just know this, but satire is against people in power. We're not making fun of the common man on the street. We're using satire as a way to criticize people in power that have a lot of influence on the regular guy's life. So it's a very important art form, and it should not be stifled, because it's really the only way that we all can tell our government, tell our leaders that we're unhappy with them, is to poke fun at them. And they should be able to take it. Unfortunately, Trump is not going to take it. So, but it really is, it really is a very important part of our democracy is satire. So.
Liza.
We all believe in freedom of speech, right? We're all here because, no, Jeff doesn't. And I'm sitting here struggling with myself because when Charlie Hebdo happened, we learned after the cohesion of the cartoonists coming together and grieving the death of these artists, a split happened among cartoonists, and there were those who were absolutists and those who felt the other way, in that all agreeing that nobody should have died. Nobody should have died. But what you were talking about, we attack those in power. That's what Gary Trudeau's speech was about, was attacking up, punching up, not punching down. And he got a lot of attacks for that, saying that. And I'm more in his camp, and these guys know that. I don't think anybody should have died. Everybody has their right to do that, but it's hard for me to say this because then I come across as somebody who doesn't believe in freedom of expression, which is not true. So it's not so easy to talk about. The organization PEN America maybe you guys know them. Last year they decided to give, and I'm a member, decided to give an award to the artist of Charlie Hebdo, and it was a huge rift among artists, not just cartoonists, but the writers. A huge petition was drawn up, feeling that they should not be given an award, and many people did not attend the award ceremony because of it. But it's a complicated topic among cartoonists, and one that we don't all agree on the finer points. So.
There were some other questions at the back there. The man with the green shirt. Hi. Oh, sorry, lady.
Hi. I was relative to probably mainly the U.S.-based cartoonists, but maybe everyone. Recently, Trump was talking about making flag burning illegal again, and I wondered if this kind of resonated in some way in the community of cartoonists in a different way, because it was more. Of course, the press has been under attack, but this is more a visual or a symbolic type of thing that, and like a gateway to First Amendment things being banned. Was this any different in any way when the flag burning issue came up?
I just think he's stupid. It doesn't worry me. I just think he's stupid.
Well,
I mean, that worries me, right?
Yeah, I did do a cartoon when he did that, because he doesn't understand anything about the First Amendment, and that is frightening, because he's going to be our president. God. I still can't handle this. But yeah, I think it's just the problem is, you know, you start there and then you go on. And what's crazy is after I did that cartoon, some of the comments that I got on the Washington Post site from people, they're like, you know, of course you shouldn't be able to burn the flag. I'm thinking, really? I mean, you really don't understand that? And what's crazy about Trump is, you know, he will sit there and talk about what a great justice the late Anthony Scalia was, right? Well, Anthony Scalia was actually, he didn't like flag burning, but he supported it in a, you know, in a judgment. So Trump doesn't even know what he's talking about. So as I said before, we don't know yet what's going to happen with him, but I fear what's going to happen in his presidency.
There's 2 points. There's one sort of general point. I think there's a difference. Satire pointing upwards is great, but stereotyping, and a lot of what Charlie Hebdo did was stereotyping people who in France especially were vulnerable. And I was really noticed just how much Islamophobia, people were allowed to say things about Muslims that they wouldn't dare to say about Jews or blacks or Latins. And that's the era that, I'm not saying they should be censored, I'm not saying they should be shot, but I wouldn't buy the magazine. Yeah, if I saw that week after week, you know, I would just cancel my subscription and let them know what I thought about them.
Yeah, but I'm going to argue with that a little bit.
Yeah,
because
well, can you argue afterwards? Because the other question is even more challenging for you.
All right.
Christian, who was just here, and I wrote a book, The UN for Beginners. He was the illustrator together. And one of the problems we find, you're cartoonist for peace. And one of the problems with humor and cartoon and satire is it's great to be against something. It's wonderful, it's exciting and gripping to be against something. How do you get cartoons that make people for something? How do you, I just say, I think it's a really big challenge because we're working on it as well. How do you actually make humor and cartoons positive for something rather than denigrating that something's there? Because it's much funnier to pull people down, isn't it? to cut their ankles from them. Please.
Well, you'll see I'm working at the moment with the European Commission in France, and I will do 30 cartoons. I've done 11 already, and we're presenting this next week in Paris. It's called fact-checking. Each time during the French election, each time a politician will say something wrong about Europe, and there will be lots of wrong things said about Europe, the European Commission will come up with a fact-checking thing, illustrated by a cartoon that I did. I've done 11 last week about that, and this is a positive way to think about Europe. And I'm a true European advocate, and this is something which is positive. But you're right in a way, cartooning for peace should be called maybe cartooning for freedom of expression rather than cartooning for peace. But freedom of expression is part of peace as well.
And yeah, just to one real quick about the Charlie Hebdo. There's a website called Understanding Charlie Hebdo. I would really encourage you to go read it because there's a lot more. It's not as simple as what you're saying that they just did all this Islamophobia. There really is. You have to understand French politics. You have to, frankly, speak French, which I don't do either. But this is a website that was put together by French academics and people that didn't have an axe to grind, but it was just trying to explain what Charlie Hebdo did through their images, the images they picked, the specific symbols. It wasn't that they were just hateful. There's actually a movie coming out as well. Yeah.
And that's a big part of the explaining.
Was it HBO? Yes. Yeah, and it's... Yeah, and the museum in Washington, D.C. just showed it recently. I highly recommend you do a little bit of research first before. I mean, when I said bathroom humor, I was kind of being a little flippant about it, but really, it's not as simple as, oh, they did these horrible, drawings, just,
And that is a big part of the explaining I had to do when I was in Los Angeles about Charlie Hebdo. People would tell me that those cartoons were racist, or they were pushing down the little guy. But you have to understand, for Charlie Hebdo, for those cartoonists, satirical cartoonists, everyone is just stupid. The rich guy, the poor guy, the Jew, the Catholic. They would pick at anyone, everyone, any religion. They would do that relentlessly. They were making no difference. Maybe one thing that you could argue is that they one thing they did not understand was that the times had changed in France. There were big minorities in the suburbs, and for those minorities, that those people from Charlie Hebdo, from the media, who saw themselves as an alternate press, they were being seen as an elite, actually, as closer to the power than to any sort of underground media. That's how the cartoonists saw themselves, but maybe from those suburbs, they were seen differently. But again, if you defending freedom of speech, defending speech is defending speech of bad taste. It's defending things that you just don't appreciate and don't like. That's the principle of it. And to answer your tricky question about how can you do cartoons when they can provoke, when you know that they could provoke reactions or even death, which is quite a perverse question, I must say. The only answer is you can only control what you are saying and be coherent with yourself. You cannot control how other people somewhere, somehow, will understand your cartoon.
And the red line is pretty clear. The red line is the law. Full stop. You can criticize a belief. A belief is not a race. Religion is a belief. And what I usually say to young people, if Muhammad feels offended, he has the right to press charges. But the trouble is, he died 700 years ago. So you have the right to criticize a belief. Charlie Hebdo made fun of people going to church or going to the mosque or wherever, and they have the right to do so. I would not do it because I'm a complete atheist, but if people want to believe in God, fine with them. If I believed in God, I think I would sleep better at night because I think there would be an afterlife, and I'm fine with that. I respect religious beliefs. I don't believe in God, but I don't want people to impose their beliefs to non-believers. So really, the red line is pretty clear. It's the law. And with the law, you have to protect yourself. You can't insult people based on false facts, for instance, because they could press charges and they could win. But I'm sorry, religion is not the truth. Religion is a belief, full stop.
I have a couple more questions. Just a quick comment about the Islamophobia. It's true that sometimes the state itself encourages a certain form of Islamophobia, and just if you're talking about the law in France and in certain other countries prevents women from wearing certain headscarves in public spaces. So that has to be remembered, I think, as well in terms of the context in which things happen. Anyway, two more questions before we finish. Hang on for the microphone, please.
I've heard about, had a cartoonist friend who came back from Turkey and said that it's pretty terrible there, that, there's TV and media blackouts and things like that. So I was just wondering if what you're, as a group or individually, have you done street art, or do you try to make an effort to document street art or participate in demonstrations or provide artwork for demonstrations and protests?
I've never heard any Turkish jokes. I've heard Irish jokes and Jewish jokes, but I've never heard any Turkish jokes. I think it's the problem is if you can't find humor and to make people laugh at what's going on and realize that, in the long run we're all dead. What difference does it make? And the people who take themselves seriously and make these complete fictions up about the disputes over how many angels are on the head of a pin. Usually the politicians do this to get people's mind off failures that are in the rest of society. And you have to keep reminding people that none of this shit counts. In the long run, you either have enough to eat every day and a roof over your head, or you don't. And the only value that we can get out of free speech is that people know a little bit. It doesn't go underground. That's the value of free speech. And that's all I have to say.
So, one there, and then we'll wrap up.
I just wanted to say that it seems to me that the degree that print editorial cartoonists are the victims of this kind of persecution and violence seems outsized compared to other political commentators, other media, television satirists. And I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about why that might be. Why editorial cartoonists? No, why are they? Why are
because
the victims?
images you don't have to worry about language. I mean and with the internet, as Patrick pointed out, now everyone can see everything. You know, you have a much larger audience, and it can be passed around. And as we all know, social media is so good at twisting things, and you can change things, and you can Photoshop things, and you can write different things to make it appear as something else. And the speed, oh my God, the speed of social media and how it can go, it gets all out of hand. I really think that's the reason. Cartoons have always been great because, even if you have a population that can't read, they can look at cartoons. This is why politicians hated cartoons. Thomas Nast, get rid of those damn pictures. They're powerful. But now we also have the internet, and we have social media, and it just it goes around the world in minutes,
Yeah, and I think it's the answer to your question is the definition I gave of cartooning, which is at the crossing of an image and also a message. So the image can be seen anywhere, and the message get lost in translation sometimes. And even in an image, for example, the representation of an animal can mean different things in different cultures. They can be this or that animal can be very offensive in one culture and mean something totally mundane in another one. So we're in bad shape.
Nicolas?
And yeah, and like I said in the beginning, it's the difference between nature and culture. And text and articles speak to your brain, whereas cartoons speak to your subconscious. And direct, it's a motorway to your subconscious images, and that's why people get puzzled with them.
The person in the middle?
So from the day that Donald Trump came down the escalator and announced he was going to run for presidency, since then there have been thousands of cartoons making fun of him, and they were terrific cartoons, and they were devastating cartoons, and he got elected president. What do you think going forward, A, the use of cartoons is at all, and B, the fact that cartoons, among many other things, did nothing to convince Americans that he shouldn't be president? Is there a different way you plan to approach cartooning in the future?
But it did convince Americans. More Americans voted. No,
yes,
I know that, but this is nobody talks about this. She got more votes.
Okay,
and they were in the wrong place, and that was the problem with her campaign managers.
Okay,
but
so
more
it's her.
American.
Okay, but I'm just saying, cartoonists did their part. Is there anything different that's going forward that?
Well, he was too busy watching SNL. He wasn't looking at us, so that's why he didn't notice.
Oh, that's because he doesn't read. But
right. Yeah, exactly.
No, but it's a good lesson for us because in Europe, because the same thing happened with Brexit. The same thing might happen in a few months in France because, as you know, we have a far-right leader who will be in the second round, maybe for sure, and she could be maybe president one day in France. So it's something. It's much larger than the cartoons. It's questioning the elites because the elites can't apparently pass the message on to the average, so-called average people. So it's to do with a larger scale rather than cartoons. It's everyone everyone should question themselves about how we get the message right or not.
Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to the cartoonists.